Listen closely. A simple object, a yellow safety vest, something every driver keeps in the car. For years, it meant nothing. But in 2018, in France, it became a weapon, a symbol, a cry of anger. Ordinary people wore it. Farmers, nurses, truck drivers, mothers. They stood together. They blocked roads. They filled the streets. They shook the nation. The government called them dangerous. The world called them rebels. But they called themselves the Yellow Vests. This is their story, a story of hope and fear, of fire and tears, of people against power. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The First Spark. Listen carefully. It began with something small, a few cents more for fuel. But for many people, it was the last drop in a full glass. France, year 2018. President Emmanuel Macron was in power. His government wanted to push green energy, protect the environment, and change how people used cars. So, they raised the fuel tax. For rich people in Paris, maybe it was not a problem. But for people in the countryside, it was fire. Imagine a farmer. Every day, he drives his tractor, his truck, his car. He needs fuel. He cannot take the metro. There is no metro in his village. When the price goes up, his life becomes harder. Now imagine a nurse in a small town. She drives many kilometers to visit old people in their homes. Every liter of gasoline is important. The tax is like a punishment. People felt ignored. They felt Paris was living well, while rural France was forgotten. The rich city, the poor countryside. This was the crack. This was the start. One idea appeared online, simple but powerful. Let's wear yellow vests. Why? Because every driver in France must keep a yellow safety vest in the car. It is the law. It is visible, bright, and easy to find. It became the symbol of resistance. First, the movement started small. On Facebook, people shared posts, "Stop the tax. Enough is enough." Videos spread quickly. People organized protests, not unions, not political parties, just citizens. On November 17th, 2018, thousands of people gathered across France. Roads were blocked. Roundabouts filled with yellow. It was cold, but people came. Mothers, fathers, workers, pensioners. They wore their vests like armor. They shouted their anger, "We cannot live like this." At first, it was peaceful. Songs, signs, voices. But soon, tension grew. Police arrived. Barricades were built. Smoke rose in the air. The anger of years exploded in one day. Journalists came. Cameras showed images to the world, and the world was shocked. Who were these people? They were not left. not right. They were ordinary, but together they were strong. The government watched. In Paris, in the Élysée Palace, President Macron received reports. He saw the pictures. The protests were bigger than expected. It was no longer about fuel. It was about dignity. It was about being heard. The yellow vests were born. Not just a protest, but a symbol. Not just a group, but a wave. A wave of anger. A wave of fear. And also a wave of hope. For some, it was hope that the government would listen. For others, it was hope that France could change. But no one knew what would happen next. The first spark was lit, and soon it would burn across the nation. Chapter 2. Voices from the Countryside. The cities were loud, but the countryside, that was where the real anger lived. For many years, rural France felt forgotten. Shops closed, post offices disappeared, doctors left, young people moved to Paris or Lyon to find jobs. Villages became quiet, older, poorer. Life in the countryside was not easy. And then, fuel tax. For city people, maybe it was just a few extra euros. But for rural families, it was the breaking point. Let us hear their voices. A farmer stands beside his tractor. His hands are hard from work. He says, "Every year I pay more. More for food, more for bills, more for fuel. My profit is less. Now the government wants even more? How can I survive?" A nurse drives her small car on dark country roads. She visits old people in their homes. She explains, "I drive 200 kilometers every week. Without my car, people will not get care. But fuel is too expensive. I feel punished for helping others." A single mother speaks in a supermarket parking lot. She wears her yellow vest. Her eyes are tired, but strong. "I work 2 jobs. At night, I clean offices. In the morning, I sell bread in a bakery. My car is my life. Without it, I cannot feed my children. The tax makes me choose fuel or food." These stories were everywhere. Different people, but the same pain. And slowly, they joined together. At roundabouts, at road exits, near supermarkets, they built small camps with tents, fires, and coffee. They talked, laughed, and shouted. They felt united for the first time. The yellow vest was a key. It was cheap, equal, the same for all. A doctor, a farmer, a student, they all looked the same in the vest. No leader, no political color. Just yellow. The countryside became the heart of the movement. From Brittany in the west to Alsace in the east. From Normandy to the south near Marseille. Thousands of people wore their vests. Every Saturday, they came back. Again and again. But why Saturday? Because Saturday was free. People could work in the week and protest on the weekend. It became a ritual. Every Saturday, block roads, walk in the streets, shout in the squares. The anger was not only about fuel anymore, It was about justice, about respect, about equality. They asked questions. Why do politicians earn so much while we struggle? Why are taxes so high, but services so low? Why does Paris decide everything, while villages have nothing? The voices of the countryside became the voice of France. The media could not ignore it. Television showed old women crying, young men shouting, children holding signs. The protest was no longer a local fight. It was a national cry. But with each Saturday, the anger grew stronger. More people joined. More roads closed. More police came. The countryside was awake. And soon, Paris would feel the storm. Chapter 3. Paris on Fire. Paris, the city of lights, the city of love. But on that Saturday, it became the city of fire. It was December 1st, 2018. The yellow vests were not only on roundabouts anymore. They were in the heart of France. They were in Paris. The Champs-Élysées, one of the most famous avenues in the world, was full of people. Shouting, marching, wearing yellow vests. At first, it was peaceful. Families walked with children. Old men carried signs. Women held hands and sang. They wanted their voices to be heard. But soon the mood changed. Crowds grew bigger. Police lines blocked the way. Barricades were set up. Shouts turned to screams. Gas filled the air. Tear gas. It burned the eyes, the skin, the throat. People coughed, cried, ran. Others grew angrier. They picked up stones. They threw bottles. They broke shop windows. Smoke rose above Paris. A car was burning. Then another. Shops on fire. Luxury stores smashed open. Graffiti on the walls. Macron, resign. The Arc de Triomphe, symbol of France, was attacked. Paint sprayed across its stone. Statues broken. The image shocked the world. Journalists broadcast live. The pictures were like a war zone. Tourists were afraid. Parisians locked their doors. Police fought back. They used rubber bullets, water cannons, tear gas grenades. The sound was deafening. Bang, bang, bang. The protesters did not leave. They returned again and again. Every Saturday, it became a ritual of anger. For many, Paris was a symbol. It was not just about taxes now. It was about power, about dignity, about the voice of ordinary people reaching the palace of the president. Some yellow vests tried to keep it peaceful. They stood with signs, asking for justice, not chaos, but others wanted to fight. Radical groups mixed with protesters. The line between anger and violence disappeared. Shops closed their doors. Restaurants stayed empty. Tourists canceled trips. Businessmen were nervous. The economy felt the shock. And the government? It was under siege. In the Élysée Palace, Emmanuel Macron watched the scenes on television. A president called the president of the rich. A leader now facing the fire of the poor. Paris was burning, not with candles, but with cars, not with romance, but with rage. The city of lights had turned into a battlefield, and the world was asking, where will this end? Chapter 4. The Palace in Danger. The Élysée Palace, home of the French president. A place of power, calm, and order. But in late 2018, the calm was broken. Emmanuel Macron was under attack, not by one enemy, not by one party, but by his own people. The Yellow Vests. Every Saturday, reports came in. Roads blocked, shops closed, police injured, citizens crying, and in Paris, fire. Macron had promised to modernize France. He wanted reforms. He wanted green energy. He wanted to show the world that France was strong. But to many French people, he looked far away, far from their pain, far from their daily life. They called him the president of the rich. Inside the palace, meetings were long. Ministers argued. Some said, send more police. Others warned, if we push too hard, the violence will explode. The government was trapped. Macron stayed silent in the beginning. He thought the anger would calm down, that the protests would fade. But the silence only made the fire bigger. In the countryside, people shouted, Macron does not listen. In Paris, graffiti on walls said, Macron, resign. The palace was not only a building, it became a symbol. If the Yellow Vests could shake Paris, could they shake the president too? The French Republic is proud of its history, but history is heavy. The memory of revolutions, the fall of kings, the storms of the people. Every leader fears that memory. At night, helicopters flew over Paris. Security forces prepared for the next Saturday. Shields, helmets, batons, gas. The government was ready for war in the streets, but could Macron win this war? A president needs more than police. He needs the trust of his people. And trust was broken. On television, images of violence shocked families, shops destroyed, police beating protesters, protesters throwing stones, old people crying. The nation felt divided. Macron's popularity dropped fast. Polls showed his support falling. From the palace windows, he could see a France he did not recognize, a France that did not trust him. Finally, he spoke. On television, with the French flag behind him, Macron addressed the nation. He promised dialogue. He promised change. He announced help for workers, for families, for the poor. More money for minimum wage, less tax for pensions. But was it enough? Some listened, some felt hope, but many Yellow Vests said, too little, too late. The fire of anger was still burning. The palace was safe, yes, The president was still there. But his image was broken. The people had touched his power, and he could feel it. The question was clear. Could Macron survive not just as a man, but as a leader? Could the palace remain strong when the streets were shaking? The danger was not only outside the palace walls, it was inside the heart of France, and the story was far from over. Chapter 5. The Internet leads the revolution. It was not a union. It was not a political party. It was not an old organization. The Yellow Vests were born online. On Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. It started with a video. A woman in her car, angry about fuel prices. She filmed herself. She shouted her pain. Enough! We cannot live like this. Millions watched. Millions shared. Then came the groups. Small pages on Facebook. People invited friends. Friends invited more friends. Soon, hundreds of thousands were connected. They planned protests. They chose meeting points. They agreed. Saturday. Every Saturday. The Internet became their headquarters. No office, no leaders, no boss, just ordinary people with smartphones. Every day, new videos appeared. A farmer speaking in his field, a teacher speaking in her kitchen, a truck driver speaking from his cabin. Their words were simple, but powerful. They spoke with anger. They spoke with honesty. And they spoke to millions. The traditional media was confused. Television used to control the story. Newspapers used to explain the truth. But now, the truth was raw, direct, from the street, unedited, unstoppable. The Yellow Vests did not wait for journalists. They became journalists. They filmed protests with phones. They streamed live. They showed police actions, broken windows, tears of old women. The world could see everything in real time. Twitter exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Gilets jaunes. Hashtag Macron démission. Justice sociale. YouTube showed burning cars. Facebook groups planned new marches. WhatsApp messages spread secret meeting points. The Internet gave power to the weak. For the first time, a farmer in a small village could speak to the whole nation. For the first time, a single mother could show her struggle to the world. For the first time, the countryside and the city were connected, instantly. But the Internet also brought danger. Fake news spread fast. Rumors became truth. Fear mixed with facts. Some said the police killed people when it was not true. Others said foreign powers were behind the protests. No one knew what was real, what was false. Still, the digital fire was burning, and the movement grew. The government tried to answer. Macron gave speeches. Ministers gave interviews. But their words felt weak compared to the flood of videos online. A minister's face on TV was nothing next to a grandmother crying in a yellow vest. The internet changed the rules of protest. No leader, no center, just a network. Cut one branch, another grows. Silence one voice, 10 more speak. Every Saturday, thousands came back. And on Sunday, millions watched the videos on their phones. They saw the gas. They saw the blood. They saw the flames. And they felt, we are not alone. We are many. The internet was the engine. It carried the anger. It carried the hope. It carried the yellow vests from villages to Paris, to the world. This was not only a French story anymore. It was a digital revolution, a people's movement, and it had only just begun. Chapter 6: Violence and Tears. At first, the protests were full of songs, voices, flags, yellow vests shining in the cold. But soon, the songs turned to screams, the voices turned to cries, and the yellow turned to red. Violence entered the streets. Not everywhere, not always, but enough to change the story. Police came with shields and helmets. They carried batons. They fired tear gas. They shot rubber bullets. The explosions echoed between buildings. Protesters answered with stones, with bottles, with fire. Cars burned. Shops were smashed open. Windows broke. The smoke of Paris mixed with the smoke of anger. Families were caught in the middle. An old woman walking home was hit by gas. She fell and never woke up. Her death became a symbol, a question. How far will this go? Many were injured, eyes lost, hands broken, faces scarred. For some, it was the police. For others, it was radical protesters. For everyone, it was pain. Tears fell on both sides. Protesters cried in rage. Police cried in fear. France cried in shame. The government defended the police. They said, order must be kept. The protesters defended themselves. They said, we are not criminals. We are citizens. The truth was complicated. Some protesters came only for violence. They were not yellow vests, but they mixed with them. Radical groups, black masks, ready to fight. They threw firebombs. They attacked police directly. But the majority were ordinary people. Mothers, fathers, retirees, students. They wanted justice, not war, yet they found themselves in war anyway. On television, images shocked the nation. A man lying on the ground, bleeding. A young woman screaming. Police running after teenagers. Shouts, sirens, flames. The French people were divided. Some said, the protesters are right. Life is too hard. Others said, the protesters are destroying our country. This is chaos. Saturday after Saturday, the violence returned. Shops in Paris put wooden boards on their windows. Restaurants closed early. tourists stayed away. The economy lost millions. The streets were not safe anymore. The Champs-Élysées, once a place for families and visitors, became a battlefield. Smoke covered the Arc de Triomphe. The sound of tear gas replaced the sound of music. And still, people came back. Injured, tired, scared. They came back. Because for them, the pain was already there, long before the protests. The violence of poverty, the violence of being ignored. Now, the whole world was watching. France, the land of liberty, equality, fraternity, was filled with flames, fear, and tears. The yellow vests were no longer just a protest. They were a national wound. A wound open, bleeding, in front of everyone. And the question grew louder. Who will heal it? And how? Chapter 7. The world is watching. The Yellow Vests were not only a French story anymore, they became a world story. Images of Paris on fire were on every television. Cars burning under the Arc de Triomphe. Shops smashed on the Champs-Élysées. Crowds shouting in the cold streets. Police and protesters clashing. The world watched, and the world reacted. In Italy, politicians gave support. Some leaders said, "The French people are brave. They fight for justice." This made Paris angry. France told Italy, "Do not interfere." But the words were already said. In the United States, commentators used the protests for politics. Some said, "Look, this is what happens when governments push green taxes." Others said, "This is the voice of ordinary people, ignored for too long." In Britain, newspapers made comparisons. Brexit in London, Yellow Vests in Paris. Two different crises, but the same feeling. People against the system. And in Moscow, Russian media showed the violence again and again. They said, "France is weak. Europe is unstable." For them, the Yellow Vests were proof that Western governments were failing. The European Union was nervous. If protests could shake France, they could shake other countries too. Spain, Belgium, Germany, they all feared the same. Would their people copy the Yellow Vests? In Belgium, small protests started. In the Netherlands too. The Yellow Vest had crossed borders. The French government knew this was dangerous. France is one of the pillars of Europe. If France looked weak, all of Europe looked weak. That is why Macron finally moved faster. He spoke to the nation again. He promised more listening. He promised reforms. He hoped to calm not only France, but also Europe, watching closely. But outside, the streets were still alive. Protesters did not care what other countries thought. They cared about food prices, fuel costs, and dignity. Still, the international pressure was real. Tourism fell. Investors were afraid. Business partners asked questions. Could France still be stable? The world was watching France like a movie with fire, gas, tears, and courage. But for French people, it was not a movie. It was real life. Every weekend, families asked, "Should we go to Paris? Will it be safe?" Shops asked, "Should we open or close?" And the president asked himself, "Will the world see me as strong or weak?" The protests had started with fuel taxes, but now they touched international politics. They touched Europe. They touched the world economy. The yellow vests were no longer just French citizens in yellow jackets. They were a global symbol of rebellion, a warning to governments everywhere. And still, the fire of anger burned. What would stop it? Words? Money? Or something deeper? The answer had not yet come. Chapter 8. The Great Concessions. Emmanuel Macron could not wait any longer. The streets were burning. The world was watching. And France was breaking apart. He had to act. He had to give something back to the people. On a cold December night, Macron appeared on television. The French flag stood behind him. His face was serious, his voice calm but heavy. "I have heard you," he said. "I know your anger. I know your difficulties. I want to respond." The country listened in silence, in kitchens, in cafes, in living rooms. Millions of eyes watched the president. Then came the promises. The minimum wage would rise by 100 euros a month. Taxes on pensions would be reduced. Over time, pay would be free from tax. The fuel tax increase canceled. These were big concessions, billions of euros, a complete change of plan. Some people felt relief. They said, "At last, the government is listening." Others were not impressed. They shouted, "Too little, too late." In the camps at roundabouts, people gathered around radios and phones. Some clapped. Some shook their heads. Some cried. The movement was no longer simple. It was divided. Some yellow vests wanted to stop. Others wanted to continue until Macron resigned. But one thing was clear. The president had bent. The power of the street had forced him to change. For many French citizens, this was historic. They had seen governments ignore protests before. But this time, the people won something. They pushed the palace, and the palace moved. Still, the fire was not out, because money was only part of the problem. The deeper problem was trust. Macron spoke of dialogue. He opened a great national debate. He asked mayors, citizens, associations to speak. He wanted conversations across the country, in town halls, in schools, in public meetings. It was a new style of politics, a way to calm the storm. But did it work? Some citizens joined with hope. They took the microphone and explained their pain. They felt heard, at least for a moment. But many yellow vests stayed outside. They said, "Words are not enough. We want real change." The concessions had stopped the fuel tax. They had added money to paychecks, but they had not erased years of frustration. Life in rural France was still hard. Hospitals were still far. Jobs were still few. And politicians were still distant. The protests became smaller, yes. The violence less, yes. But the yellow vests did not disappear. They stayed in car trunks, ready to be worn again. The government had survived, but it was weaker. And the people had learned a lesson. They had power. If they stood together, they could move even a president. The Great Concessions were a turning point. Not an end, not a victory, but a fragile peace. A peace built on money. A peace built on promises. A peace that could break at any moment. The fire was smaller now, but the ashes were hot, and everyone knew one spark could light it again. Chapter 9. The Legacy of the Yellow Vests. The flames of protest are gone now. The roundabouts are quiet. The streets of Paris are calm again. But the memory of the yellow vests still lives. It was more than a protest. It was a lesson, a warning, a story that changed France. The movement showed the power of ordinary people. Farmers, nurses, mothers, truck drivers, citizens who were not rich, not famous, not powerful. Yet together they shook the palace. They made a president bend. The yellow vests also showed the new face of protest. Not unions, not political parties, but social media. Facebook groups, live videos, smartphones, a digital revolution in the streets. For politicians, this was frightening. They saw how fast anger could spread, how one small tax could grow into a national crisis, how one video could bring thousands to the streets. For the people, it was a discovery. They learned. We are not alone. We have the same problems. And if we speak together, the world must listen. But the legacy was not only positive. There was pain, violence, shops destroyed, families afraid, police injured, protesters scarred for life, some dead. France was wounded. The country is still divided. Some remember the yellow vests with pride. The day the poor stood up. Others remember them with anger. The day France burned itself. And Emmanuel Macron? He survived. He stayed in power, but his image changed forever. He will always be the president who faced the yellow vests. The movement slowly faded. Week by week, the numbers fell. But the yellow vest itself did not disappear. It remained in every car, every trunk, every memory. A symbol waiting to be used again. And beyond France, the world learned too. From Belgium to Canada, from Iraq to Lebanon, people copied the idea. Yellow vests appeared in many protests. The color became global. The message was simple. We are visible. We are here. You cannot ignore us. The legacy of the yellow vests is still alive. Not on fire, but in the hearts of people. In their distrust of elites. In their demand for dignity. In their belief that the street has power. The story of the yellow vests is not finished. It is a seed. One day, it may grow again. Different people, different cause, but the same anger, the same cry for justice. France has changed. The world has changed. And the memory of yellow vests shining in the dark will not be forgotten.